Let's talk about adding fractions with uncommon denominators. When we add fractions, the denominators must be the same. And typically what we see in 5th grade is that our denominators are not the same. So we have to first make them common before we are able to add them. We are going to use LCM, which stands for least common multiple, to get those denominators the same or to make them common. When we see LCM, we see the word multiple. And what the word multiple means is that it is the number you get when multiplying a number by a whole number. So for an example, 12 is a multiple of 3 because 3 times 4 is 12. 6 would also be an example of a multiple of 3 because 3 times 2 is 6. But 7 would not be a multiple of 3 because you can't multiply anything by 3 to get you 7. All right, let's look at the first problem of 2/3 plus 1/6. When I first look at this problem, the first thing I notice is I cannot add these fractions because my denominators are not the same. When I'm looking at LCM, I am pulling my denominators, 3 and 6. And remember, I'm using LCM to find common denominators, so I'm going to pull these guys off to the side. The first thing we're going to do with LCM is list the multiples, the numbers you multiply to get, the numbers multiplied together. So 3 times 1 would be 3. 3 times 2 would be 6. 3 times 3 would be 9. 3 times 4 would be 12. 3 times 5 would be 15. These are all multiples of 3. Now 6. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 3 is 15. 6 times 3 is 15. Oh my gosh, no, it is 18. So sorry, guys. 6 times 4 is 24. It is very important that you go in order of the counting numbers so you can keep them in order. Now that we list the multiples, we want to find what's in common. What is in both lists? What multiples fall in both lists? I do not have 3 in this list, so I'm not underlining it. I see 6 is my next one, and 6 is in both lists, so I'm going to underline 6. It's kind of hard to see, I'm sorry. 9 is my next multiple of 3. 3 is not in my list of multiples for 6, so I'm not underlining it. 12 comes next. 12 is in both lists, so it is common, so I'm underlining it. 15 is not in this list, so I'm not going to underline it. If I would have continued going, 18 would have been in this list, but I at least have one multiple that's in common, so I'm going to leave it at 15. After I find my multiples, underline the common multiples, I am looking to see which one is the least, which one is the lowest common multiple. I see that 6 is my least common multiple, so I'm going to circle that. After I find LCM, my LCM is going to become my new, I'm out of room, denominator. So 6 will be my new common denominator. So now I will take and I will rewrite my fractions, 2/3 and 1/6. And now I'm going to set up an equation to get me my new common denominator. I'm going to take 2/3 and I'm going to multiply it by something to get me the new denominator of 6. Remember, the new denominator came from my LCM. I'm going to go ahead and set this one up too. I'm multiplying 1/6 by something to get me to my new denominator of 6. I really don't need to do this one because I already have a denominator of 6, but just to get in the practice of setting these equations up, we're going to do it together. I'm going to start with the bottom because I have things I can work with here. What times 3 gives me 6? 2. So I'm going to check that. 2 times 3 does give me 6. Whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. 2 times 2 is 4. The fraction you make in the middle that you multiply by, I like to call a one-ster. There we go. This guy is equal or equivalent to 1. If I have a box cut in half, there's denominators 2, that's my parts, and I shaded both parts, I would have a hole shaded. The number you multiply by you want to be equal to 1. Now let's look at this one. 6 times what gives me 6? 1. What I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. 1 times 6 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 over 1 is equal or equivalent to 1. So now I have two fractions that have the denominator of 6. So I'm going to add those together to get my answer of 5/6. Sometimes we have to be careful because we may have to simplify this fraction. In this problem, this fraction is in its simplest form, it is in its lowest form. Let's do another example. 4/5 plus 2/3. The first thing I'm checking, can I add these two fractions? No, I cannot because my denominators are not equal or equivalent. They're not common. What do I do when I do not have common denominators? I'm using LCM. When I'm using LCM, I'm pulling my denominators to find the multiples. So 5 and 3. 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 5 is 25. Now 3. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 5 is 15. After I list my multiples, I'm going to underline what is common between the two lists, what multiples are the same in both lists. Start with 5. 5 is not in my list of multiples for 3. 10 is not in my list of multiples of 3. 15 is in my multiples of 3. 20 is not in my multiples of 3. 25 is not in my multiples of 3. As long as I have one multiple that is common, that's all I need. 15, I'm also checked off that they're in common. Now I'm looking to see which one is my least, my lowest. 15 would be my lowest common denominator. Remember that my LCM becomes my new denominator. So I'm going to take and rewrite my original fractions. I'm setting up my equation to find my new fraction. I know that I must multiply by something to get me a new fraction that has a denominator of 15. That comes from my LCM. I know I'm multiplying 2/3 by something to get me a denominator of 15, which comes from my LCM. 5 times what gives me 15? 5 times 3 gives me 15. What I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. 5 times 3 is 15. 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times what gives me 15? 3 times 5 gives me 15. What I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. 2 times 5 is 10. These guys are equal or equivalent to 1. Now my fractions have common denominators. This fraction are equal or equivalent. This fraction are equal or equivalent. So I'm taking my fractions and I'm now adding them together. I see that again, an improper fraction. It is improper because my numerator is bigger than my denominator. A lot of the times the kids are going to want to say, well, that's my answer and that's that. 9 times out of 10, you will never see an answer choice as an improper fraction. So we need to take this improper fraction and make it into a mixed number. To do that, we are going to divide, and we flick the top number into the house. Divide by my denominator. 15 goes into 22 one time. I need to write my steps. 1 times 15 is 15. When I subtract, I'm going to get 7. Remember, when I'm making a mixed number, I want a fractional part. So my remainder becomes my numerator. My divisor becomes my denominator. They both start with D. So 22/15 is also equivalent or equal to 7/15. This fraction right here is in its simplest form, so I have no need to simplify. So 4/5 plus 2/3 is equal to 1 7/15. Let's do another example when we are adding mixed numbers. So we will do 1 1/3 plus 2 1/2. When I am adding two mixed numbers or a mixed number plus another fraction, I must first take my mixed numbers and make them into improper fractions. To go from a mixed number to an improper fraction, I take my whole number, multiply it by the denominator, add it to my numerator. 1 times 3 is 3, plus 1 is 4. My denominator stays the same. Same thing here. Mixed number to improper fraction, whole number times denominator, plus numerator. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. Denominator stays the same. I see that I have two fractions that I'm adding together. I check to see if these are the same. They are not, so I must use LCM to find common denominators. I'm pulling my denominators to find the multiples. The multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12. Multiples of 2 are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. Check that off. Let's see what's common. 3 is not in this list. 6 is in both lists, so I can underline that and that. 9 is not in this list, but 12 is, so I'm going to underline that. Now that I've underlined the common multiples in each list, I am circling which one is the least common multiple. The least common is 6. Remember, my LCM becomes my new denominator of my fractions. Rewrite my fractions. Now I'm setting up an equation to get me to have the new denominator of 6. I am multiplying by something to give me the new denominator of 6. I am multiplying by something to give me the new denominator of 6. 3 times what gives me 6? 3 times 2 gives me 6. What I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times what gives me 6? 2 times 3 gives me 6. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 5 times 3 gives me 15. Now I'm going to take these fractions and add them together. I can add them because my denominators are the same. 5 plus 15 is 23. When I add denominators, they just stay the same. 23 is a mixed number. Remember that we do not want mixed numbers. I mean, not a mixed number, I'm so sorry. 23/6 is an improper fraction, and 9 times out of 10, that will not be an answer choice. To go from an improper fraction to a mixed number, we flick the top number in the house, divide by the denominator. 6 goes into 23 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18. Forgot to write my steps again. I apologize. After I divide, I multiply 3 times 6, give me 18. Then I'm subtracting to give me 5. I have nothing to bring down, but I have a remainder that's not 0. So I want to take and make a mixed number. So my 5 becomes my numerator. My 6 becomes my denominator. Divisor, denominator. Take those D's and line them up. So 1 1/3 plus 2 1/2 equals 3 5/6. If this fraction was not simplified, I would need to do that as well. Thank you for watching.